Okay, so the audio on the original recording got kind of messed up, but I think I can walk you through this. Um, this is how I'm making my loaves now. It's a little bit different from how I used to. I've done some research and watched a lot of videos and read some books and stuff. What I can tell you more than anything else is that the important thing is that you get the gluten in the dough developed during the bulk ferment. A lot of the other stuff, it's important, but it's highly flexible and you can do just about anything. So I've got my starter. It's just equal parts of whole wheat flour and water. You can use any kind of flour for the starter. You mix them together, equal parts water and flour, and you let it sit out until it starts to bubble. And you've got yeast, you've got starter. There's a lot of instruction about discarding things and feeding things and whatnot. And there's lots of different ways of doing that. But basically, if you've got bubbles, you've got yeast happening. Yeast will eat what you feed them, and you're ready to go. So the first thing I do is I mix a pre-ferment, and that is with about 33, 33 grams of, or no, it's 50 grams of the starter. It's not a third of each. It's half and a quarter of each. So it's 50 grams of starter, and then 25 grams of. I use hot tap water. I like to keep the temperature up. Makes the yeasts happy. They're more active when they're warm. And 25 grams of flour. Mix that up, and it should have the consistency of like a wallpaper paste. You can see that here in just a second. So there's my 25 grams of whole wheat flour. This is for the pre-ferment, or the what do you call it? The poolish is another word. I think that's when you're using just powdered yeast. I don't know. But it's the Kickstarter for the loaf. That's where we're going to get the yeast into the loaf. So mixing it up real good. Again, it should be about the consistency of a wallpaper paste. So I'll show you here. You can kind of see it's thick, goopy, not watery. And I'll just let that sit. And I've let it sit for, I think, as little as just a few hours. I've let it sit overnight. You're just looking to get it spongy and bubbly. Um, so it really doesn't matter. And I don't think you're gonna overdo it. You can't go too long. If you do, you can always add some more flour and get it started again. I use my oven as a proofing box. I turn the light on, and that keeps the inside of the oven warm, a nice temperature for everything to go on. So I'll just put that in there. And I think in this particular instance, I let it sit overnight. I'm not really sure. I don't remember what I did, but that's a common thing. Is I'll mix it up before I go to bed. Let it sit overnight, and then get started in the morning with the loaf. Okay, so here is the pre-ferment after it's been sitting overnight, and we're going to start the bread making process. Um, and I like to make a 500 gram loaf. That's 500 grams of flour. And again, you can use whatever mixture you'd like of whatever kind of flours you like. I use all-purpose flour and wheat flour, and I tend to go half and half. A common ratio is 400 grams of all-purpose flour and 100 grams of whole wheat flour. But I like to go half and half. I like to get more of the whole wheat flour in there, and it works out just fine. So with my trusty kitchen scale, I'm measuring my, I'll do 250 grams of all-purpose flour and 250 grams of whole wheat flour there. I think that's what I did on this loaf. I don't remember. Um, and then I'm going to put 300 grams of, again, hot tap water in there. And this is just to hydrate the dough. The technical term is autolyse. And I think it makes a difference to do it, but honestly, if you skip it, it's not a big deal. You can still make a fine bread with that. So I put the flour and the water together. I put it in the stand mixer, and just enough to get it to come together, so where it's coming off the side of the mixing bowl and everything's mixed up properly. You can do that by hand. It just takes longer. I think it's just fine. I've made great loaves by hand as well. It's just a little bit more effort to get things going. So for the autolyse phase, after you've mixed the flour and the water together, again, there could be a lot of flexibility with this. I'm not sure that it matters a whole lot. And again, I've even made loaves where I've skipped it and they've turned out fine. But I think you get better results from doing this. So after the dough is mixed together, I'll let it sit sometimes a couple hours. And again, I've also gone several hours with it. It's not going to hurt it to sit there as long as it doesn't dry out. I think that could cause a problem. But what I do is I leave it in the bowl of my stand mixer, and I've got a little heating element on the stand mixer that keeps things nice and warm. And I put a towel over the bowl to keep it from drying out, and that seems to work pretty good. Okay, so the autolyse sat for about an hour or so, maybe a little bit longer. I don't know. Again, you can be really flexible with this. As long as you don't let it dry out, it's going to be fine. So you can kind of make it fit to your schedule as it works. Shorter is fine too. But so we're adding the rest of the water. It's 25 grams of water for a total of 325 grams. We're going on a baker's percentage here of a 65% hydration. So 500 grams of flour, 325 grams of water. Again, I'm using hot tap water here just to keep the temperature up. And then 10 grams of salt. I like to use kosher salt for just about everything that I do cooking-wise. And I bought this kosher rock salt by accident, so I've been using that in my bread. It dissolves, so it doesn't really matter. And it's these big chunks of salt. It always dissolves in the loaf anyway. So 10 grams of salt. Again, that's a 2% salt according to baker's percentage. So that's all the ingredients. It's 500 grams of flour and 325 grams of water and 10 grams of salt, and that's it. And then there's your leaven or your Polish or whatever the heck you call it. That's the starter that was taken and pre-fermented to put in there. So I'm just gonna dump that in there and I throw it back in the stand mixer. And you can do it by hand, but I do it in the stand mixer and run it like through a mixing speed. I think it's like speed 3 with the dough hook till it really starts to stick together. And then another couple minutes on the kneading speed 2, 1 or 2, just to, again, see how it kind of looks. You want to get it to the point where it's really really holding together and kind of getting flung a little bit to the outside of the bowl, so it's kind of rubbery. You're getting that gluten activated. Okay, so this is what the dough looks like after being mixed in the stand mixer for, I don't know, about 5 minutes or so. Again, flexibility, it really, you're not going to overmix it. It'll be fine. It's kind of got some shine to it. It's pulled away from the sides of the bowl. It's sticking together. It's kind of rubbery. I use a spray bottle with water to wet my hands, to keep my hands from sticking to the dough. You can also flour your hands if you want. I just try to keep any more flour than I need from getting into the dough. I transfer it to this other bowl that I like to work in. Doesn't really matter. So this is the first stretch and fold, which is really the important thing for getting the gluten activated in your dough. And you can see that I'm pulling it up and wiggling it a little bit. At this stage, the dough is still kind of stiff, but you can kind of feel it getting a little bit more flexible, I guess. You're just pulling it up, stretching it over, or stretching it out, wiggling it, and then folding over itself. And I just go around the bowl a couple times until I've gone around the entire dough and kind of done that. And it'll start to hold together, starting to tighten up a little bit when you're doing that as well. And then at the end of each stretch and fold, I'll just roll it around the side of the bowl a little bit. It sticks a little bit to the side of the bowl, and that tightens it up and makes a nice little dough ball out of it there. So And again, there's a lot of flexibility in this. You're just working the dough, trying to get that gluten working, and you'll get a feel for it after a while. Um, so after you get the dough ball tightened up, you can kind of see again it's got a little bit of a sheen on it or a skin. And then I'm going to cover it and put it in a warm place for about a half an hour. Um, and I use my oven with the light on for that. Okay, so here I am going to do the last stretch and fold. I think in this case I did four of them on this dough, four or five. You kind of feel it out depending on how the dough is feeling. Um, so spaced about 30 minutes apart. This is the only part of the whole process that I really worry about my time. So like I want to make sure that I'm going to be around and available for about 2 hours, so that every 30 minutes I can get up and stretch and fold. You can see that the dough is bulked up a bit. I like to measure the temperature of the dough from time to time, just to like keep it around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That keeps things going the way they should at some sort of level of predictability, I guess. So doing the last stretch and fold, again, moistening my hands with water so it doesn't stick. And you can see on this one how much more flexible it is. And the dough should be feeling fairly soft and yeah, just a lot more flexible. So and you want to be gentler with these later stretch and folds as well. You can be kind of hardy and rough with the first couple ones, but as the dough becomes more developed, you want to be just a little bit gentler with it to maintain that structure. So I've got dogs playing in the background there, so they're dropping the bones on the floor. So it starts to stick together, and that's great. And then you're gonna again roll it around the side of the bowl. Maybe going for more of a little bowl or ball shape here. A lot of times people talk about pre-shaping the loaf, and that's kind of what I'm doing here, I guess. Just rather than bench resting it or putting it on the counter, I'm leaving it in the bowl. With that stage. But I am really trying to form this dough ball here a little bit more than previously. So because I'm not going to do any more stretch and folds. So this is what we're getting to. And then I'm just going to cover it and let it rest for a bit. A good test for whether the dough is ready to go or not is this window pane test, and you kind of pinch up the dough a little bit and press through with your fingers on the other side. What you're looking for is for it to become very, very thin and transparent before it breaks through. And you can kind of see here when I do this that it's still pretty stiff, and I break through pretty easily on that. It's not ready to go. So that's just a test you can kind of do to let it go. Again, a lot of flexibility here. You can really let this dough sit for however long you need it to, really. I find that overproofing is not as big a risk as underproofing. So in most situations, I mean, I guess if there's a really hot day or something really active, you might end up with some overproofing. But really, you can just let it go and be patient. It's totally fine. Make it fit into your schedule. Okay, so here the dough sat after the last stretch and fold for about 20 minutes. Again, that's kind of a pretty typical time period for a pre-shape. And you can kind of see here with this window pane test, it's gotten a little bit better. It's still a little on the stiff side. I'd like to see it getting a little bit more transparent before breaking through, but you can see how much better that is. That'll just continue to develop as we go. And I'm just going to take it and put it in the proofing basket and let it finish its bulk ferment in the proofing basket. Okay, so I'm going to put it in the proofing basket. I've got these fancy baskets with cloth liners and everything. This is a bowl-shaped one or a ball-shaped one. I've also got a banneton or a loaf-shaped one. Honestly, you can use a bowl. I you want to flour it pretty liberally. I sprinkle flour in it to keep it from sticking, but you can do that with a bowl too. Sometimes people put a cloth inside a bowl, it's fine. So here we're going to shape the loaf. Again, I squirted some water on the countertop to keep the dough from getting really sticky. You're just kind of flattening it out. I'm going to fold it kind of like an envelope, so a third over, pull a side out, stretch it a little bit. Again, kind of like the stretch and fold, but not as, I guess, not as vigorous. Stretch the other side out and fold it over. There's a lot of different ways to do this too. Basically, you're just kind of trying to build up layers in the dough, and then you're going to roll it into a nice little dough ball using the countertop surface to grab the dough a little bit. You're building some tension into the dough. You get a feel for it after a while. It's there's a sense that you get, but you can kind of see it coming together and getting tight, and you're just using the tension, the friction with the countertop to kind of get that going. You can kind of see there how it gets smooth and starts to hold its shape a little bit. That's what you get. That's what you want. You're great. And so again, you're going to take that and throw it in your proofing bowl or your proofing basket or whatever you got. And just make sure that you've liberally floured that so that the dough doesn't stick to it. Some people like to use rice flour. I just use all-purpose. And then there's going to be a little bit of a seam on the bottom from this, and then I'm just grabbing and knitting that seam together, just grabbing little pieces from either side of the seam and folding it over, and kind of pinching it together. Again, lots of different techniques on this. You just don't want any of the inside of that dough to be open at this stage, is all that's happening there. So again, gonna cover it and put it in a warm place to let it proof. And I think on this one I let it go for several hours because I had stuff to do when I was out of the house. You could also just, at this stage, you could just plop it right in the fridge if you wanted. And that can go for a really long time. It's going to continue to ferment. It's just, how quickly it's going to ferment. Obviously, as it gets cooler in the fridge, it's going to ferment more slowly. But usually I like to proof it in the room for a little while, or in the oven for a little while first. So usually I'll proof it in the basket for a few hours, just again fitting it into my schedule however it works, and then I'll throw it into the fridge overnight. And again, a lot of flexibility with this. I read somewhere anywhere from 8 to 36 hours. I like to throw it in the fridge before I go to bed at night, wake up in the morning and bake the bread in the morning, because that seems to work for me pretty well. This particular one, things got a little crazy, so it was in the fridge for a couple of days, and I wasn't sure when I was going to be able to bake it off, so I froze this one. I'd never done that before. And so it was a bit of an experiment to me, and it actually turned out really, really well. So I froze this one for a couple days, and then when I was ready to bake it, the day I was baking it, I pulled it out and let it come up to room temperature. Took most of the day to do that. And I don't know that was necessary or not, but I just didn't want to introduce another variable in the process. So I sprinkled flour on top of on the bottom of the dough, that the bottom of the dough is facing up now. And I've preheated the oven with my bread cloche to 550 degrees. Flip it over onto some parchment paper there, and then I'm going to score it. And again, this allows the steam to release from the loaf in a predictable fashion. One way of doing it is just to run a single score across the top like that. I'm using a razor blade tool called a lam, but you can use a sharp knife. You do want to get in there. You do want to get underneath the skin of the bread and see the inside of the loaf. You'll see little bubbles and stuff. So for bowl-shaped ones, I like to do a little cross over top of the loaf like that. With the Benetton ones, the more loaf-shaped type, I'll do a series of horizontal cuts. But really, you can do all sorts of things. Make it as simple, as fancy as you want. It doesn't really matter. Functionally, it's the same. So the oven has been preheating to 550 degrees. That's as high as my oven goes. And I cook my bread on a pizza pan. Um, Underneath this fancy stoneware bread cloche. Anything that's going to contain the steam is good. A lot of people use um, Dutch ovens or things like that. Um, so I was redoing that because I think I fumbled over my words there. But yeah, the bottom of my bread cloche got broken, so I use a pizza pan now. Just putting the loaf right on the pizza pan, covering it up with the warm cloche, and I'm going to reduce the heat of the oven to 500 degrees. I bake it on the bottom shelf. I put the shelf all the way down on the bottom of the oven and bake it down there to get a nice crispy crust on the bottom. Close up the oven, reduce the heat to 500 degrees, and let it bake for 20 minutes. Okay, so our loaf has been baking for 20 minutes, 500 degrees, and we're gonna take the lid off. This is my favorite part because you get to see the oven spring now. You get to see what's happened, and this one turned out really great. And I can tell you, even when they don't, the bread's still delicious. It's just not as beautiful. So for that oven spring, you're looking for that kind of shoulder to lift up off the bottom. You're looking for that rounded edge, but you can kind of see how much bigger the loaf has gotten. At this stage, the loaf is actually baked. So the additional time is just really to get the finishing color working for you there. And I like a kind of a darker loaf, so I'll let it go. I reduce the heat. I've been playing around with this 465, 475, 485. I play around with it and just to go. It doesn't matter. You just keep an eye on it. I'll set the timer for 20 minutes, but I'll keep an eye on it during that 20 minutes just to see how it goes. And I like a little bit of that red color, so you can kind of see there. Maybe you like it a little less done. Maybe you like a little bit more done. Doesn't matter. So that again, that last little bit there is just getting some color on the bread. Sometimes the parchment paper sticks a little bit. That's all right. It comes off, and anything that sticks can be scraped off with the lame or a knife afterwards too. It always comes off. So you're just gonna let it cool. And you want to resist the urge to cut into that. It is very tempting, and warm bread is wonderful, but I tell you that the results are much better if you leave it and don't cut into it. If you cut into it right away, it'll start to get kind of gummy, and you don't want that. Smells wonderful. It's great. You saw me knocking on the loaf there. One way to tell that it's done is you can stick a thermometer in it, and it should be about 200 degrees, or you can knock on it and it should sound hollow. So here we are. Here's our finished loaf, and it turned out great. I let it cool for about an hour, and that's what it looks like on the inside. You can see the how the bubbles formed, those pockets in the crumb, and that looks really good. And that they're thrusting, they're kind of vertical like that. That means you got a really good oven spring going on. I gotta say, this is one of the best loaves that I've ever made from a visual perspective. And I don't know how much of that was because of the freezing or not, but I was really, really happy with it, and it was delicious.